In a tranquil military cemetery at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, west of Boston, lie the graves of Italian and German prisoners of war. One notable tombstone is that of U-boat captain Lieutenant Friedrich Steinhoff, dead at 37 years of age in post-war America. His final days marked by mysterious complications while in custody. In a serene cemetery in New Mexico lies the gravesite of Friedrich's brother Ernst. For his pioneering work in rocket guidance engineering with Wernher von Braun, he is inducted into the International Space Hall of Fame. The National Socialist past of Ernst will eventually raise ethical questions. During World War II, the objective of both brothers was to use their training and respective skills to destroy the Allies.
The Germans opened unrestricted submarine warfare.
Ernst is born in Treise, Germany on February 11, 1908. On July 14, 1909, his brother Friedrich is born in Kühlstedt. As a young teenager, Ernst possesses a passion for flight and indulges in studying and flying gliders. In 1923, he joins a group of his high school friends in Kassel in their pursuit of gliding activities.
Well, a glider is an airplane that doesn't have an engine. So you're just depending on the altitude and the updrafts to carry you along till you find a place to land, because you're always coming down except for the updrafts. He was a glider pilot.
Once Hitler becomes chancellor in 1933, the various flight organizations become nationalized and fall under Nazi supervision. The Nazi Party soon extends political authority over all aspects of civilian life, including glider clubs, which were most often right-wing. In 1935, Ernst holds a then-distance gliding record of 500 kilometers, or over 300 miles, by flying from Bayreuth, Germany to Brunn in the former Czechoslovakia. Given Ernst's complete fascination for studies of flight in the 1930s, he pursues engineering at Darmstadt Technical University. In the meantime, his brother Friedrich, Fritz, follows his passion for the sea.
Friedrich Steinhoff was a German naval officer. Before he joined the Navy in 1935, he served for a couple of years in the German merchant marine, and there he got the license to serve as first officers on ocean-going ships. But with the restoration of the German army and the Navy in the early 1930s, he chose that he should join the naval ranks, and that is exactly what he did when he entered the Navy in 1935. So he had to train as a commanding officer first as a pupil commander on a frontline boat, and then as a special commander perisher course in the Baltic before he was given his first command.
Commander Steinhoff was an accomplished sailor. He was loved by his crew, and the people that I interviewed and spoke with that knew him well said that he was a very devoted captain. He took care of and he was very concerned about the safety of his young crewmen.
His wife Ilse said he loved the open sea, but was very claustrophobic. He, however, entered into the U-boat division of the Kriegsmarine, or Navy, in 1941. Respected and viewed as courageous heroes by leaders of Germany, Steinhoff, a U-boat commander, and other German submarine officers patrolling the Atlantic are considered major threats by the Allies in the Battle of the Atlantic. Britain's hope for survival is a merchant ship supply line for food and arms, crucial to facing a potential invasion by Germany in Operation Sea Lion. The war rages on while Friedrich serves in the Navy, and Ernst begins working at the Peenemünde rocket site, recruited by Wernher von Braun in 1939.
Ernst Steinhoff was a glider pilot. He was connected to the Research Institute for Gliding in Darmstadt, which was a research institution of the Air Ministry and the Luftwaffe. He actually was trying to finish a PhD on aircraft instruments when he was hired by Peenemünde, so he had actually not quite finished his doctorate yet. But something about him, maybe he meshed well with the personality of Wernher von Braun, who was the technical head of the project. Something caused von Braun to think he was the right guy to try to govern this technical project of figuring out what kind of guidance system to develop.
Ernst, filled with ambition and experience, sees Peenemünde as an ideal location for his future work in the area of flight and eventually rocket engineering.
This is Peenemünde, Germany's top-secret rocket research facility in the marshes and sand dunes near the Baltic Sea. Here in 1937 and 38, the guided missile is moving from the drawing boards to reality.
The story of Peenemünde began well before the Second World War, even before Nazi regime came into power. So strategists in the Army Ordnance Office discussed how to rearm Peenemünde after the lost First World War, starting in 1930. And they got the idea of creating a missile system as a long-range weapon to terrorize civilians, to destroy cities, to create this, what was later on called the total war.
With experience in instrumentation and guidance control, Ernst eventually becomes more involved in what becomes Germany's latest secret weapon, the V-2 rocket. A long-range ballistic missile, the rocket is a harbinger of future warfare.
Steinhoff was an academic by training. He was also an enthusiast in flying. He was a pilot himself. So he was motivated by his personal interests, but also as a visionary engineer to create something completely new. And he was for sure a very right-wing man. He was a militarist, he was a nationalist. So I'm quite sure that he was proud of working for the army.
So the V-2 rocket was a liquid propellant rocket. It burned liquid oxygen and alcohol to create thrust of over 50,000 pounds to propel this warhead and the missile to an enemy city about 200 miles away. In order to hit something, it had to have a guidance and control system. So up in the nose, under the warhead, there was gyroscopic equipment and other equipment in order to try to direct the missile so that it actually impacted near the target. And that was really the most difficult challenge of the whole V2 rocket, was trying to get it to land somewhere near a target, and in fact, it wasn't very accurate in its ultimate use.
Steinhoff was hired as department director for the complete guidance system and all measuring works. So this team of Steinhoff dealt with the problem of how you get a missile starting, launching at point A to point B. It's a vertical launch, and then you have to shift it to flying like in this ballistical way to the given target, which was thought as London and other British cities. So they had two main technological systems to guide the rocket. One a gyroscope system in the rocket itself, and then a control system from outside. This was a radar guiding system to send the optimal signal where it should go to.
My understanding is, over casual conversation at a family get-together, two brothers were talking about their respective areas of expertise, one a submarine commander, one a rocket scientist. And obviously the thought came up, would it be possible of putting rockets on a submarine? And that's where it all started. And the two of them went back to their respective commanding officers, and they got some seed money. They came up with an off-the-shelf rocket system that the German army had been using, and they put them on a rack, 6 of them on the stern of the U-511. On June 4th of 1942, they submerged 40 feet off the coast of the rocket research facility at Peenemünde in the Baltic Sea and fired the rocket successfully, proving that you could fire rockets from a submarine underwater, and they did so 15 years before the United States and the Russians were able to do it.
So the rocket launch off the U-boat really was a test to see if you could bombard a shore from a U-boat. I guess the U-boat would have to surface and then fire these, or maybe just under the surface, fire these sort of mid-sized artillery rockets using solid propellants.
They could prove that, first, these rockets could be fired from a submarine even when the submarine is submerged. Second, the range was a kind of disappointment because the maximum range of these rockets there was about 5 kilometers. And from these results, the German U-boat command deduced that there were no use for this kind of weapons in the Battle of the Atlantic because the range was too small. The U-boats had to close the shoreline and then to fire onto targets no further away than 5 kilometers, and there was hardly any chance to employ this kind of weapon.
At Peenemünde, Ernst, disappointed with the results of this U-511 experiment, continues his collaboration with von Braun and the team of scientists as director of flight mechanics, ballistics, guidance and control, as well as instrumentation. The goal, to produce a guided missile with an explosive head, the basis for the V-1 and V-2 Vengeance weapons.
The V-2 rocket was projected. The idea and then also the actual deployment of the weapon was the deployment as a terror weapon. So it should not just destroy buildings, kill people, but terrorize these people by we can get you wherever you are, whenever, by night, by day, at any moment. The idea was this psychological effect should be so strong that the British civil society says, okay, we can't stand that terror any longer. Germany has won. This was the idea, but this idea was addressed to the British society, not to the US society. Everybody knew that the range of these weapons were limited. The Peenemünde project leaders conceptualized a rocket internally called the America rocket. So this should be a two-stage rocket to really become an intercontinental ballistic missile. But also this was just an idea and existed not more than on some papers.
Despite the intellectual and technical capabilities of the team, progress does not come easily. Trials on the A1 continue.
The Peenemünde project group test launched the missiles from early 1942 and had 3 failures.
On October 3rd, 1942, on the 3rd launch attempt, the rocket actually worked. It accelerated to over 4 times the speed of sound. It traveled 190 kilometers, that's like 120 miles. It ascended to an altitude of like 90 kilometers, which is close to the edge of space. It was an extraordinary accomplishment, and in fact, one that was not repeated anytime soon because all the missiles after it also blew up or crashed. So it was a lucky break for Peenemünde and the German Army rocket group because it allowed political support to continue and even strengthen the development of the rocket as a weapon.
This was the first man-made object in sky. And they not just launched it, they not just measured the flight to get information about what worked and what didn't work, but also they documented these by filming them to then advertise for their project with these very impressive images. They were a marketing department for themselves too.
The goal now becomes convincing Hitler that the project of the A1 rocket tests after fall 1944, known as the V2 rocket, is a most urgent one and needs his support.
General Dornberger, Werner von Braun, and Ernst Steinhoff got into an airplane. Steinhoff flew them to East Prussia to meet Hitler. This was to be another briefing with Hitler about the progress of the A4 project, what became the V2.
In July 1943, these 3 leading men of Peenemünde went to Hitler in his Führerhauptquartier, Wolf Layer in East Prussia, to present the whole project after the first successful launch several months before, and to advertise for their projects. They needed a lot of money to build the mass production sites.
So in that briefing, they waited for hours and hours for Hitler to show up. I mean, he had very strange hours. He basically got up at noon and went to bed at 5 a.m. or something. Finally, after hours and hours of waiting, they heard in the back, "Der Führer!" And, you know, the Führer comes in with Speer and with some generals and some of the other key leaders of the Third Reich, and they were given a briefing. And in this briefing, Dornberger briefly introduces von Braun. Von Braun narrates a film. And this is a film made of the 3rd of October 1942 launch, describing the whole project.
So they showed this movie to Hitler and described how this weapon works and what this weapon could do for the war effort.
And so it really was a new attempt to sell the program.
Hitler is convinced the project must be supported with a monthly production of 2,000 A4s. In mid-June 1943, British RAF reconnaissance photos had revealed rocket building activity in the Peenemünde area. 2 months later, in August, the RAF bombed the rocket site. Ernst's daughter, Monika, recalls her dream of Christmas trees falling from the skies. In reality, flares dropped by planes preceding the bombing mission. Once the rocket site is targeted by the RAF bombs, to produce the rockets, concentration camp prisoners labor in horrific conditions in underground sites like Dora. Historians estimate that over a 2-year period, approximately 1/3 of the 60,000 workers in the Mittelbau Dora system died from illness, beatings, hangings, or intolerable working conditions. It is believed that more slave laborers died in these conditions than in the wartime use of the V-2 rockets. Von Braun and Steinhoff were aware of the appalling conditions of the slave labor at Dora in pursuit of the success of the V-2 rocket. According to Dr. Michael Neufeld, quote, "The prisoners were only factors of production," close quote.
In 1944, a German spy was landed on the American coast, and it was just a matter of weeks that he was arrested. And under interrogation, he told the Americans a story about German rocket projects which being launched in the very near future against America. And this started a kind of hysteria in America, because rocket attacks against the shore of America, against the big cities on the East Coast, was something that the Americans really feared. And at that time, they had some intelligence information that the Germans might be trying to put these known V-2 rockets aboard submarines.
While the production of the V-2 rocket progresses, the FBI interrogates a spy rescued from a captured U-boat about possible bombing of the East Coast. And the information is passed on to Director J. Edgar Hoover in October 1944. This leads to New York Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia's apprehension, voiced on a radio broadcast on December 10, 1944, fearing a rocket attack on the city. Chief of War Production Albert Speer further increases concern among Americans when he announces in Berlin that bombs would fall on New York City by February 1st, 1945. Then, in March 1945, Allies intercept a message reporting that long-range U-boats could attack American coasts. Another message intercepted by U.S. intelligence noted that U-boat Captain Friedrich Steinhoff had already tested rocket artillery from a U-boat, with further goals of potential long-range bombing from a submarine. This information, along with earlier messages, put U.S. forces on alert, creating Operation Teardrop to protect the eastern shore from potential U-boat rocket attacks. As World War II in Europe came to a devastating climax for Germany, the Soviet army swept into Berlin for an ultimate victory over fascism in May 1945.
Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister during the war, was a very important figure in that Battle of the Atlantic. During the war, he did everything to succeed in this battle. And after the war, when he was no longer Prime Minister in Britain, he wrote his memoirs in a series of books. And his often quoted sentence that there was nothing else than the German U-boats, which is in effect a statement he made post-war in order to promote his books. During the war, of course, he was also worried, but he never stated this officially in the way he did post-war.
Churchill's concern about the peril of the U-boat is legitimate, however. During the Battle of the Atlantic, U-boats crippled supply lines of food and war material that were crucial to keeping Britain in the war. Sonar and radar later crippled the power of the U-boat force. German Admiral Dönitz called to stand down following the unconditional surrender of May 7, 1945, expresses sincere gratitude for his men who had fought bravely during the years of war. The U-boat campaign, with the loss of 30,000 men, has come to an end. My U-boat men, 6 years of U-boat war lie behind us. You have fought like lions. A crushing material superiority has forced us into a narrow area. A continuation of our fight from the remaining bases is no longer possible. U-boat men, undefeated and spotless, you lay down your arms after a heroic battle without equal. We remember in deep respect our fallen comrades. Your Grand Admiral.
Karl Dönitz radioed to all U-boats on May 4th to cease hostile action against Allied shipping. He gave certain directions for them to surface, to radio their positions to the nearest Allied forces, to fly a black flag from their periscope, which the captains thought was an insult because a black flag is a sign of piracy. It was actually for higher visibility on the horizon rather than a white flag. To jettison certain equipment like their Enigma machines, their courier burst transmitters, their code books, to jettison anti-aircraft ammunition, and to set the barrels heading towards the stern, and to then comply with the surrender. And some boats did that. A number of them, they were vectored into Portsmouth over the next several days. The U-873, under command of Captain Steinhoff, surrendered and was escorted into Portsmouth, New Hampshire Naval Base on May 17th of 1945.
Steinhoff and his crew are first sent to the Portsmouth Naval Prison near Kittery, Maine, and are initially interrogated. From there, they are transferred by bus to the Charles Street Jail in Boston. While imprisoned, Captain Friedrich Steinhoff faces brutal interrogation. The Navy officials are aware of his connection to his brother, an engineer at the Peenemünde rocket site, as well as the potential plan to attack America's East Coast with rockets.
The Navy knew, and I know this from documents from his interrogation records, that they knew he was the commander of the U-511, that they knew took part in the early rocket experiments off of Peenemünde. So they knew this guy that surrendered while they were anticipating a rocket attack on New York. They knew that they had the guy who took part in the first successful rocket launches from a submarine. George Seitz said that after his initial interrogation, he saw Steinhoff return to his cell, Captain Steinhoff, with a swollen and bloody face. So he knew his interrogation had been very physical.
The commander came back from interviews severely bruised, beaten, bloody, not so much bleeding profusely, but contusions to the face, blue and purple marks that were demonstrative of strikes to the head and face.
Commander Johann Heinrich Fehler of the U-234, who was held in an adjacent cell and said he couldn't sleep all night because of the sounds of the beating that were being dealt out to his fellow U-boat commander, Friedrich Steinhoff. And then he heard the commotion the following morning, didn't know what was going on, and that's when they allegedly found Steinhoff unconscious in a pool of blood.
The prisoner was tied to the chair, did not have any means of defense. So the effect would have been both painful and terrifying. Now, am I asking for sympathy or for a German prisoner of war? I'm not. I'm answering the question of the facts of what happened. The facts are that under the Geneva Conventions, to which the United States was an original signatory, the public humiliation of prisoners, the beating of restrained prisoners, the torture of prisoners is not sanctioned.
On May 19th, Steinhoff allegedly takes his own life. Records indicate the failed attempts by U-boat medical officer Dr. Karl Steinke to revive Steinhoff.
I think there's no doubt that had medical authorities given him medical attention, that they could have saved his life. The ship's doctor did everything he could and alerted the American doctors to save him. And as I understand it, he bled to death on a gurney in a hospital. Now, if you look at the Charles Street jail and the hospital, they both are still standing. They're literally about a street length away from each other, 50 feet or so. So the idea that medical care could not have reached him in time is nefarious.
A subsequent declassified Naval Intelligence investigation report deplored the looting of souvenirs and cited Steinhoff's death as suicide.
Do I believe that Commander Steinhoff committed suicide? Absolutely not. And there were several reasons for it. Commander Steinhoff, right after he got off of his boat, spoke with the press. Now, the press was invited down, the local newspapers, radio stations, to witness these German submarines surrendering. And they made the press, and he actually made a statement in English to the press that I will be giving a press conference very soon. Now, and I've talked to forensic pathologists about this, not just the instrumentality and the wound that he allegedly received, but I've talked to psychologists about this as well, people that deal with suicidal individuals, and they're all convinced that when somebody makes a commitment to do something like that, they're not very likely to actually commit suicide until they take care of the things that they wanted to do. The stories don't add up. So you have 5 different stories: broken wristwatch, prescription glasses, sunglasses, spring on cot, and wire from hat. That doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't have 4 or 5 separate explanations. He absolutely did not commit suicide, in my opinion.
While Friedrich is still in custody, his brother Ernst, along with von Braun and other Peenemünde engineers, fear being captured by the Russians. For insurance, the V2 documents are stashed in a secret location.
Steinhoff was one of the engineers, of the scientists who really were proud about this working for the military, working for Germany. I'm not sure whether you can say he was 100% Nazi, but he was convinced about what he did. One interviewer of the leading engineers after the war, he wrote, they were convinced Nazis, and now when we move them to the US, they become opportunists. So what they told after the war, we had to work for the military, we had to work for Hitler because nobody other would give us the money to realize our dream of space. This was not true in the war, but this was true for what they did then in the US. And in the US, they thought these are the people who at least thought about how can we destroy US cities. And then they come to the US and work for our army and create ballistic missiles for us. And this was widely discussed in the US public sphere after the war.
In the last days of World War II, the rocket was very important to the Allies that were coming to occupy Germany. Even though the V2 had been a failure as a weapon, it was a revolutionary change of technology. All the major powers thought this ballistic missile is a new weapon, a new technology that we need to exploit. So in particular, the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain and France all rushed to grab people and equipment from the V2 to try to bring into their own rocket programs or to create new rocket programs in their countries. In the long run, the V2 was a very important missile because it changed the whole history of rocketry. We went from a small amateur rockets of the 1930s in the United States, in the Soviet Union, in Germany in the early 30s, went to something that was, by the standards of 1945, gigantic, huge, powerful, and long range compared to anything that had been developed in rocketry before.
All the Peenemünde engineers run away from the Soviet army coming to Peenemünde in the first month of 1945. They went to the so-called Mittelraum, where also this production site concentration camp used to be.
Now begins Operation Paperclip, the American race to capture the German rocket scientists before the Russians do. A forecast of the United States and Soviet conflict to come. Von Braun, Dornberger, and other leading Peenemünde scientists escape to Bavaria and give themselves up to the Americans. The Russians get a few of the lesser men.
From then they went to Bavaria and were captured by the US Army. Very soon were interviewed. Okay, you are the guys to construct these weapons we all were aware of. And how did you do this? What was this project? So they collected the documents, all the papers of Peenemünde, and they collected as much technology as they could get and brought all these to the US.
At White Sands, New Mexico, the huge missile takes off. This giant engine of destruction, designed by Hitler to annihilate allied nations, now serves the worthy cause of peacetime research.
Summer 1945, the first 100 and something of these former Peenemünde engineers went to the US, others were brought to the Soviet Union, so the victory nations of the war were very aware of, okay, this will be the new crucial technology for this coming, what was later called the Cold War, and they were very eager to get this technology and the people who developed this technology. So in the US, these 100 and something, later even up to 350, I think, former Peenemünde engineers and scientists worked on more or less constantly and created a new army rocket test site in the desert of New Mexico, and later moved to Huntsville, Alabama, where they started to build then even bigger rockets. The so-called Redstone rocket should then be the core to develop the rockets, which then started the space age in the US.
In Bavaria, Ernst surrenders following Werner and Magnus von Braun with other German rocket engineers' successful attempt to reach the Allies. America is a decade behind the Germans in rocket engineering and values these new scientists from Peenemünde, who could potentially help the US military ballistic missile program.
Dad and von Braun and the ones, they had already been contacted and told that America wants you. So if you go and you give, if you work for them and you give the secrets of what you've discovered with the V2 and everything to the Americans, they will take you. And then they first had said, we don't want the families, we just want the men. And the men said, we're not gonna, if you don't take our families, we will not work for you at all. We can become your prisoners, but we will not help advance the science, And so then the Americans agreed that the families would come a year later. And we had to kind of trust that, I guess, that was, and I imagine there were concrete steps to make sure that would happen, So we were in the outskirts where my grandmother lived, actually, Landshut, from Munich.
The US Army took care of us, and we lived in what used to be a German Army barracks. I remember they were 2-story buildings, and all the families of the German scientists lived there and were well taken care of by the US Army.
And then we got on the boat in the spring or in the early summer.
Ernst arrives aboard the SS Argentina in November 1945, while families of the German scientists arrive in the following year. Ernst, along with his wife Hilda and children, settle in at Fort Bliss, Texas, near El Paso, and lead a very restricted life.
You know, we lived behind barbed wire, and we were only bused out for school. And we never went to White Sands, for example, while we were in Fort Bliss. You know, we just were there. Nobody drove a car. The men were bused to the White Sands Proving Grounds, you know, 5 days a week. And so all we had was, you know, was our German, you know, our German festivities and all that stuff, you know. And it was probably, I think, you know, it was probably idyllic compared to the chaos and the destruction we had left in Germany.
Later in 1946, Albert Einstein and other scientists protest the decision to bring Nazi scientists to America. Prominent citizens as well did not approve, fearing that they may be bearers of racial or religious hatred or be potential spies. At the White Sands Proving Grounds in New Mexico, Steinhoff and von Braun continue working on the V-2 rocket, before von Braun works with the U.S. Army, while Steinhoff collaborates with the Air Force. Von Braun is at the heart of the American missile and space program, with the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and ultimately Apollo 11, which propels astronauts to the moon in 1969. Following his work at White Sands and the Holloman Air Force Base, Ernst continues his work in the armament industry with the Rand Corporation. He dreams of further space exploration even before the moon landing. His extensive writing and conference papers include work on Mars exploration in 1962 and 63. Ernst believes that sustainability on Mars could be achieved through mining. In 1976, the Viking 1 makes space history by first landing on Mars. More recently, in 2020, the Mars Perseverance rover furthers Ernst's dreams and research about the ongoing exploration of the planet. As with von Braun's Nazi Party affiliation, Ernst's past raises some questions. Can the politics be separated from the science? Walter Dornberger and Werner von Braun both discuss their history in their post-war writings, considering the rocket engineers at Peenemünde as non-political or even anti-Nazi, at times antagonistic toward Gestapo tactics or SS authority. Their actions contradict their apologetic writings. According to a post-war notarized affidavit, Ernst swears that he became a member of the Nazi Party on August 1st, 1938, and that his membership had been backdated to May 1st, 1937. He states he accepted the Nazi Party offer since a refusal would eliminate his participation in his favorite sport of gliding and would affect his professional work in aviation. Ernst concludes his affidavit by testifying that he never developed political activity or held any positions in the Nazi Party. His history, however, shows him as a nationalist, idealist, and militarist throughout the war. Was Ernst what Michael Neufeld referred to in his description of von Braun, a 20th century Faust who succumbs to the temptation to work with an evil regime in return for the resources to carry out the research closest to one's heart? Further questions remain surrounding the treatment and death of Friedrich Steinhoff, who destroyed lives and Allied cargo in Germany's war efforts. Ernst Steinhoff's guidance control efforts brought about death and destruction in the final days of the war. Late in the war, the Allies learned of the brothers' collaboration using guided missiles fired from a submerged U-boat to potentially attack the American East Coast. What Friedrich and Ernst had envisioned in their 1942 U-boat rocket experiment is no longer an experiment. During the Cold War in the 1950s and 60s, submarines became capable of launching ballistic missiles. 80 years after the war, in May 2022, North Korean media announces that the country successfully launches a nuclear missile from a submarine. U.S. government critics label it propaganda.
Now we have ballistic missiles aboard submarines. The large submarines are carrying 24 ballistic missiles. They were armed with atomic bombs. So this is the ultimate weapon nowadays. It is one of the tools which saves freedom today, because now with a position to destroy the world with one click on the trigger, it is just this what saves our world from destruction in the late 70s or 80s. And what the Germans started in merging submarines or U-boats with rockets is now a daily situation.
Ironically, the brothers had two very different American experiences: despair, degradation, and death for Friedrich, and safety, recognition, and a rewarding life for Ernst. First emigrating with rocket engineer Werner von Braun to the U.S. with Operation Paperclip, Ernst is eventually honored with him in the International Space Hall of Fame. Friedrich lies unnoticed in a military cemetery.
If we consider the situation that both brothers had at the end of the war, so Friedrich, as a U-boat commander, had nothing to offer. He was just somebody who was in the wrong situation or in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ernst had something to offer for the Americans. That was his knowledge about rocket technology. So nobody would have ever dared to torture Eric to extract the knowledge he had. So the Americans choose the relatively easy way in luring them to them, because they offered them a better life at that time in America. And so it's not surprising that Ernst took the situation to move to America. For these two brothers at the end of the war in 1945, the situation could have not been more different than it actually was. One was imprisoned and the other one was invited to America. This is a very tragic situation, but it's just one of the many situations in war which are not rather logic.